So, I have a friend whose name is Rob Colbrin. He has a studio in his basement. I actually used to record late at night in his basement. We'd go, spend half the night at his house and then come driving home late at night. And he worked for NASA. He actually worked with a robot at NASA, was kind of his main thing. And just a really, really brilliant dude. But I'll never forget one time he told me, I was talking about how fascinated I am by space. And I don't know much about it, but I love to learn about it, especially if people can speak my language, which is way down here. And he started talking to me about just the idea of these missions to Mars. And this was almost 20 years ago. He said, it's not a technological problem that we have getting to Mars. I'm sure that we'll overcome whatever technological problems we have one day to get there and all that. But he said, really, our biggest problem has nothing to do with probably fuel and engines. I don't know. Maybe it does, but he was saying this isn't our biggest problem. He said, our biggest problem really has to do with astronaut bone density. And I say, what? And he was like, yeah, if someone goes on that long of a journey, they start to lose bone density because of the lack of gravity that they're used to on Earth. It's not as much. And so the gravity on Mars, for instance, this isn't even counting the journey, the gravity on Mars is about 38% of the surface gravity on Earth. So if you weigh 100 pounds on Earth, you would weigh about 38 pounds on Mars. And over time, your bone, they don't need all those resources, so they start to lose density. And those resources go to other places in your body, and you develop osteoporosis, and your bones get fragile and brittle and all that. He said, so we have to figure out how to get people to survive a journey and a trip and a stay on Mars because people's bones just can't handle it. And so first of all, how wise is that, for NASA to figure that out and to know that in advance? Like, here's one of the big problems. Just people, they won't have the strength for that kind of a journey and to be in that kind of a place. It would be kind of cool, though, because you could, think of how high a white dude like me could jump on Mars. I was like, I only got 38% of the problem, that's awesome, man. I'll be double-handed dunking up in Mars. But we'll move on. So Mark chapter 6. Verse 45, Tira just read it, so I won't go through the whole passage again. This is a famous story of Jesus walking on water. Even if you haven't been to church, you've heard the phrase walking on water. Nowadays someone might say, my boss wants me to get this project done by Thursday. She thinks I can walk on water. It's a way that we refer to miraculous or godlike actions. Or she loves her son. She just thinks he walks on water, blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing. So it's made its way into our language. So here's what's interesting. If you know of this story, if you do, what you probably remember from it is that one of Jesus' main 12 disciples, Simon Peter, the most vocal, he stepped out of the boat when he saw Jesus walking on water. He said, Jesus, tell me to come to you. And if it's you, and so he steps out in the water. He walks on water too, but then after he loses his focus on Jesus, he begins to sink, and Jesus rescues him. So what's interesting is that's only mentioned, that part of the story, by one gospel writer. And the other two who mention it, there are four, three mention it, and there's only one that mentions that part. What's interesting is the other two don't mention that at all, and it's very interesting to look at this story without that. Because that can take the whole focus of hey, are you going to step out of the boat? Are you going to walk on water with faith in Jesus, focus on Jesus? That's all great. That's all legit. But what about when that's not mentioned? What is the story about? And Mark, what we're in right now, he is known as the secretary, basically, of Simon Peter. So this is Simon Peter's gospel, and he didn't include that part of the story. He thinks this story is significant without his personal thing that happened, which is stepping in. He got to walk on water. Sure, he started to sink, but have you ever walked on water for 36 seconds or however long he did? No, but he doesn't even mention it. So it's really cool to look at this and say, what does it teach us about the real Jesus aside from that story? So verse 45, it says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. So it's been a few months since we've been in this series. We've been in and out of Mark. We're kind of working our way through Mark. The last time I preached on the previous story, it was a while ago, so just a quick recap. It's really important to know what has just happened before this story. So Jesus was in the wilderness Multitudes of people were there. They didn't have enough to eat. So he miraculously multiplied some bread, some loaves, and some fish, and fed the whole multitude. And so it was 5,000 either men or 5,000 families. We don't really know which. There was 5,000 men for sure, but they could have been like head of households. And so 5,000 families. But it's interesting because you're like, someone else in Israel's history has provided bread in the wilderness before. Who was that? This guy named Moses, who's really, really important. And we won't get into all that story, but I'm going to allude to several stories. You might be like, I don't even know what that is. But I'm just trying to show you there's connections here. And so today's story supplements that story of the feeding of 5,000. One of the gospel writers, John, throws in this one tidbit that shows it's a very important highlight about the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And that is, he says in John 6:15, Jesus, knowing that they, the people he just fed, intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew to a mountain by himself. So Jesus feeds all these guys, and all these people say, okay, this is the prophesied, promised Messiah, the one that's going to be sent by God to deliver us. Surely he's going to deliver us from the Romans who have their yoke on Israel right now. He's going to deliver us. We want a revolution. He's a miracle worker. And so they start getting fired up. And so that's what's going on previously. So there's this danger of an uprising as a result of the miracle. So Jesus stays to dismiss the crowd. And it's no doubt his purpose is to calm them the crap down, because that's not what he's trying to do, is start a revolution. And in verse 45 it says, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida. He made them get in the boat. It might even be more clear to say he compelled them to get in the boat. Why? Probably to prevent them from getting involved in this messianic uprising. You know, they're pretty quick to do what the crowd said sometimes. And Jesus is like, I do not want my disciples to be caught up in this nationalistic outburst. And Galilee, where they're at right now, was a hotbed for revolution against Rome. Like, we will rise up against the Romans. Warren Wiersbe, an old preacher, said the 12 were not ready to face this kind of test because their idea of the kingdom was still too nationalistic and political. So you could say that the real Jesus for this story sent them out to be ambushed by the storm. He's like, okay, I want you guys out of here. I'll dismiss the crowd. I'm going to go pray on a mountainside. You guys get in the boat, and I know very well what's going to happen to you. You're headed toward a storm. So they head out into the storm. What's interesting through this whole story is, and you have to put that story and this story together. They're kind of woven together. Is that Jesus is saying when he feeds them in the wilderness, I am the God of Moses. There's so many allusions to the Old Testament scriptures, which is all pre-Jesus born in Bethlehem. He's also like, in different ways, I am the one who parted the Red Sea. You know, like it wasn't just Moses that did that. I am the one who did that. And I'm the ultimate power. And you and the multitude, disciples and multitude, you cannot control me for your own purposes. Like, I'm not going to be the kind of king you want. I'm going to be the kind of king that I came to be. I'm not here for your agenda. I am here with my own agenda. You will not use me. This is what the real Jesus says. I will not be used for your agenda. I won't fit into your agenda. I'm the uncontrollable force, and I'm the untamed Lord. What does that mean practically? Well, let me start with something that you're going to say, that's not me. And it might very well not be, but I'll then generalize it. So one of the dangers is there's something called the prosperity gospel. You might know it as the health and wealth gospel, or you might be like, I don't know what any of that stuff is. But picture the kind of televangelist or pastor who's like, if you believe in Jesus, believe for a promotion. He wants to make you rich. He wants to give you this. He wants to make you healthy. You won't get sick. And it's basically the theology that says, I'm coming to God expecting that if I'm right with God, bad things will not happen to me. Like storms won't happen to me. Everything is going to be fine. I will be healed. I'm going to be rich. And Jesus shows us here, you can't make me king by force. You can't use me just to fulfill your ambitions. Like, that's not how it's going to work. And I think that probably the greatest Christian in all of history, the Apostle Paul, who wrote Scripture and followed Jesus in faith, went out all over the Mediterranean world sharing Jesus. He got his butt kicked every other day because of his faith in Jesus. And I think he would say to prosperity preachers, where's my health and wealth? I'm getting stoned half to death. I'm getting stoned half to death for preaching about Jesus. And so I want this health and wealth gospel because my faith is actually getting my butt handed to me. And so the prosperity gospel, so I would never say, here are the televangelists or here are the local pastors that are, prosperity gospel. I would never say that on stage. Ask me off stage and I'll tell you in a second. Because I think it's such a disease theologically in the church. And it basically says, if you get sick, you didn't have enough faith. If you are doing not well financially, you're not having enough faith. It's such bull. And so Jesus says, you will not use me. And so what does that mean? Because probably only 80% of this crowd is interested in the prosperity gospel, right? Who wouldn't be, But here's the general application. As many of us in some ways say, God, I will serve you if. God, I will serve you as long as. And so think about that. God, I will serve you as long as people like me. As long as what I'm saying doesn't contradict the relativism of the culture. It doesn't contradict, you might make people upset. But this is what I believe. As long as people still like me, even though I believe what Jesus says, then I'll still follow you if. I will still follow you as long as. But here's the deal. This is so important. Whatever is on the other side of our if, I will follow you as long as this. I will follow you if. Whatever is on the other side of our if is our real God. That's the real God that we serve. God is just an instrument. He is the means to that end. I will serve you as long as people still like me. I will serve you as long as you will give me a spouse. I will serve you as long as I can date who I want to date. I will serve you as long as I can still have money, be as comfortable as I want to have the things that I want to have. I will still serve you as long as that is true. And the real Jesus says, you can't use me like that. I will not be used by you. And so whatever is the condition, that's the actual God. Whatever's on the other side of your if. And so the bread miracle wasn't enough. We need the storm miracle to kind of put that together to see who the real Jesus is, that he's this uncontrollable force. And so it's funny that there's two storms at least that the disciples were in. The first we talked about months ago in Mark chapter 4. That was one storm that Jesus actually was in the boat with them and calmed, and he was in it with them. This time, though, he's on a mountainside praying, and they're by themselves. It's almost like a progression. This time now, you're by yourself to begin with when the storm hits. So Jesus is up on a mountain. He's looking out into the world, and he sees his disciples struggling. Verse 48, he saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Now, in verse 48 there, by stating Jesus saw the disciples, picture the setting. It is now nighttime in a storm. Now, if it was daytime and it was clear out, maybe he could see the boat because Sea of Galilee is probably 4 miles wide. It's more of a lake, honestly. It's called the Lake of Tiberias, but we call it the Sea of Galilee. And so in a clear day, he could probably see that boat out there from a mountain. But at night, in a storm, you can't see 10, 15 feet in front of you in a storm. So really, this seems to be saying Mark is probably indicating another miracle here, is that he's up on the mountain and supernaturally, he sees his disciples in the darkness out there struggling. And it says they're off course. They're straining at the oars. They couldn't get to land. They're stuck in the middle of the lake, and they just can't get where they want to go, and they're out there struggling. And so they're struggling with forces beyond their control. He sees them. They're in danger of sinking. He sees that they're overwhelmed. He sees them struggling with problems they can't handle on their own. And I just, man, that really speaks to me out of this passage. To realize, I think Mark's hinting at a miracle right here, the supernatural sight of Jesus. And I just want to say, whatever you are going through, let me assure you, even when no one else sees, Jesus can see your struggle. Because so many of the things that we struggle with are often unseen. Or people might know of our situation, but they don't know of the daily difficulty that comes with what we're going through. Jesus sees your struggle. Like he sees through the night and the darkness into the storm, and he sees what you are going through. When I was a middle school kid, I've talked a lot about how I grew up in a home with a stepdad who was a bully, and it was a very oppressive environment. And he said, this is his words, not mine, and I'll clean it up for you, because a Christian he was not. Okay, he said all the time to my mom, whose name was Debbie, Debbie, my goal in life is to be an a-hole, and he nailed it. I mean, that was what he wanted. That was his motto. He said it all the time. And so my goal in life is to be an a-hole. And living in that kind of house as a kid, and then a middle schooler, and then eventually in high school, I could not wait to get out of the house. And I know that's a typical thing for a kid to say, but man, I couldn't wait to escape that house. And just him ruling like a tyrant. And every Thursday night, we would watch Cheers together. Anybody? Old school Thursday night Cheers would come on, and that song would come on. Sometimes you want to go. And I loved that song because every Friday the next day, and this is Thursday night, I left to go to my grandparents' house. And it was an escape to get away from there where I was loved and it was safe. And to go Friday night, Saturday, Sunday to be with them. And then anytime school was out in the summer, it was just, a refuge. Here's one brief refuge, the weekend, where I can get out of this house. And when I was a middle schooler, all I wanted to do was run away. But I knew the consequences, the ending of that story is not going to go well. Eventually, someone's going to find me. I'm going to be brought back. And then the thing that I love, my refuge, will be taken away. I won't be able to go to my grandparents' house in the weekend and the summers. So it was just this stuckness. But early high school, after my freshman year, my best friend invited me to church camp. I became a follower of Jesus, and my perspective changed so much when Jesus was in the boat with me. Like, Jesus has seen this struggle the entire time, and he has never not cared. He has always known, and he's always been available for me to let him walk through this storm with me. He sees you. And some of you are in situations like that, maybe different contexts. You are in a terrible, scary marriage. Jesus sees you. You are you're a kid who's in a home where you don't feel safe. I hate that for you, but Jesus sees you. You are in a work situation that's terrible, but you don't feel like you can get out of it. You need this job. Jesus sees you. And to me, this is one of the most powerful things in this passage to me, is to see that as a miracle, that it isn't just like, oh, look at them right there they're out in the middle, stuck and working, and they can't get past the storm. They can't get out of it. They're stuck in this storm. And when I'm in a storm, man, I take comfort in the lyrics of this beautiful song, Jesus is a friend of mine. Isn't it just, it's like a hymn. It's like an old, beautiful, so well written. Jesus is like a Mountie. He always gets his man. I mean, it is just so powerful. Verse 47, it's because I'm just moving on. The boat was in the middle of the lake. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. They're straining to try to get out of the storm. They're in the middle of the lake. It's like what we would call, they're spinning their tires. It's like they're rowing and rowing, and they're not going anywhere. Have you ever been there? Spinning their tires is what Bob Seger, the great theologian, called running against the wind. I can't make any progress whatsoever. Here's the deal. We can get stuck in a storm. Like, not only do we have storms in our lives, but we can get stuck there. You may even work hard in your own strength and knowledge, but the forces against you are too strong. Like, I need some kind of power outside of myself. Scratch that, outside of this world. I need some power. And so you can get stuck. How? Let's be practical. Some of you have been hurt a long time ago, and you are still stuck in distrust. And it's why you haven't dated. It's why you haven't married, but maybe you are dating. It's why you won't go to a Mo group. It's why you won't tell anyone your struggles or your story. You are stuck in the middle of the lake, in the storm, in distrust. You're stuck there. And it's a spiritual isolation that it creates. It affects you spiritually. You can get stuck in all kinds of ways. You can get stuck in grief. And this is so difficult because grief, it's awful to lose someone you love. It is so hard. It is so difficult. But there's a normal grief process that takes a lot of time that people go through, and it never goes away. It's never like, I forgot about him. But, there's this healthy way you get through grief, and eventually you start to function again, and you move on in ways with life, always honoring and remembering that person and being thankful. But you can get stuck there. I had a great friend who we first met when we first moved to Greater Cleveland. I would camp out in independent Starbucks, and I would sit there and work on my laptop to prepare to start Momentum and to lead the team for Momentum. And there was this group of old Italian dudes that came in a certain day a week. It might have been a couple days a week. They'd meet together and have coffee, and I loved these guys. Eventually, they adopted me into their little group, and any time where I could take a break, they'd be like, come on over and have coffee with us. And I'd just turn around, scoot my chair over, and I'd sit with all these old Italian guys. Eventually, it got to this point where they invited me to go to Mama Santa's in Little Italy with them for their annual time that they went in December before Christmas. Dude, they ordered stuff off the menu. They ordered stuff that wasn't on the menu that they were like, hey, you should try this. I'm like, I want to try this. This isn't even on the menu. Try it. Oh, my gosh, that is so good. I want to come with you all the time to Mama Santa's. That was just great. But one of those guys, his name was Joe, and he's this tall, good-looking older man. And one day, he eventually lost his wife, Betty. And man, it was so hard to see Joe grieve. And anytime he would talk, he'd say, Dan, I lost Betty. And I'd be like, I know, Joe. And he would take the same picture out every time, out of his wallet. See, isn't she beautiful? Oh, she's so beautiful, Joe. And he would cry. Tears would stream down his face. I'd never seen him cry before. And he'd cry and he'd cry. And then eventually, I stopped going to that Starbucks. They opened a Starbucks close to my house in Garfield Heights, and I was like, well, I'm going to camp out here now. This is a much shorter drive. And I didn't see him for months and months and months. But anytime I'd go back and I'd run into him at Independence, Starbucks, I'd see Joe, and the first thing he'd do is I'd say, hey, Joe, how are you doing? Do you know I lost Betty? Yeah, I know, Joe. He'd take out his picture. Isn't she beautiful? Oh, she's so beautiful, Joe. Tears would stream. Years would pass. And I would see him somewhere. He would be shedding tears, showing me the picture, stuck in grief. One day I went to the cemetery, corner of Brecksville and Rockside, and I was taking pictures for a potential music video about epitaphs. And I was looking for interesting epitaphs on gravestones. I saw a figure all the way across the cemetery, which is a pretty good walk. I was like, is there any chance? I know Joe visits that grave daily, at least he used to be in the practice of it. Walked across that cemetery, and by the time I started getting into shouting distance, I think he was even shouting, it was a little windy, like, hey, is that Joe? And all of a sudden he turned, and he didn't hear me, but he turned, he had laid some flowers down, he went and got in his car, parked right there, he drove away. And so I started mixing in a jog, and he pulled off before I could get there, and I turned and I looked, Betty and his last name. I was like, it was Joe. He's still here. He's still at the grave every day. He's still, I'm sure, shedding tears there, just stuck in grief. And man, it is so difficult. Like, I cannot imagine losing my wife, but my wife has told me, after I die, grieve and move on. Like, as insensitive as that sounds for someone to say, she's like, I want you to live a life again. Don't be stuck in grief. I would always honor my wife's memory, but it's like, but you have to move on. You can get stuck in a storm, right? Like, here is this thing. It could be a divorce. It could be betrayal, whatever it is. You can get stuck there, and it affects you spiritually. You are just rowing, and you're getting nowhere, and you're stuck spiritually. Cornerstone of Hope, I would just suggest that in Independence, by the way. They have some free services, some free group therapy stuff they do. I don't know what all costs, what all is free, but also we'll have a professional licensed counselor here at the building, Stacy Atkins, starting June 2nd. But other ways you can get started, one other way I'll mention is I went years ago and I saw, when it came out in the theaters, a movie called Edge of 17, 2016. It's Haley Steinfeld, who's very popular now. But naturally, I went and saw a coming-of-age movie about a 17-year-old girl by myself, because popcorn is so good. I don't care if there's no options. I want popcorn with fake butter. So I went and saw this movie. And in the movie, she's going through everything. Everything is wrong. Everything is going wrong for the character. Her dad dies. Her only friend starts dating her brother, who she hates with a passion. So she's like, now my hated brother and my best friend, and I don't have my best friend. So everything. And she runs her mouth through the whole movie so much that she doesn't listen to anyone. And at the end of the movie, she realizes and admits, I guess I just lie to myself and make myself think I'm the only one that's going through anything hard. She said, that makes me feel special. It makes me feel unique. And I was like, wow, that was a really insightful conclusion for this mainstream movie, because here's the deal. Self-pity eventually leads to self-centeredness. And that's what's happening in this movie is she is stuck in the storms of, these are all these things going on. When you think of self-centeredness, you usually think of some cocky punk who's arrogant. They think they're all that. You know, they're just great. Well, that's not the only way to be self-centered. You can be so consumed in your own problems or your plight in life or who's against you, what's going on, that it's a pure self-centeredness. All you ever think about is your own self and your pain. And that's what she came to at the end of this movie. That's the conclusion. There's a self-centeredness that doesn't just lead to arrogance. There's a self-centeredness that leads to depression and anger and bitterness and meanness, because all we're doing is thinking about ourselves. And so sometimes pain and sadness can make you more and more self-centered. I'm just stuck in the middle of the lake. I'm in the storm, and all I'm doing is thinking about me. And 100% Satan wins the battle if all you are thinking about is you. You don't serve anyone. You won't follow anyone. You won't listen to anyone. He wins. So we can get stuck in a storm just like the disciples did, and completely in need of Jesus coming into our storm. So Jesus walks out into the lake, and it's fun because the Greek word in the original used for walking is actually strolling. It's actually the kind of word you use if you're on a journey and you stop to do some sightseeing. And so, which is funny because, you know, I was picturing if it's depicted, which is usually depicted really well if it is, the Chosen's scene for this is amazing. But I always picture Jesus kind of like sludging through. He's like, his feet aren't sinking, but he's moving through the storm. He's leaning forward like, look at him go, man. He's just tough walking through the storm, but he's strolling. He's just like walking like, this doesn't affect me. I am the uncontrollable force. And he's walking to them. He's not slogging. He's casually strolling. And this means that this great uncontrollable force has entered the world, and he has absolute power over this. This has no power over him. And so Jesus isn't just saying, again, I am the ultimate Moses. He's saying, I am the God of Moses. And it's so much in this story in these little hints and ways. One scholar appropriately says this. He says, to understand the full significance of Jesus walking on the water, you have to understand a web of Old Testament motifs in the text. And so you won't get a lot of these references if you're not super familiar with the Bible, and that's okay. But I want you to know they're there. I want you to know these connections are being made by Jesus, that Jesus just doesn't walk around saying, hey, by the way, I'm God. Hey, by the way, I just wanted you to know, in case you weren't paying attention, I'm God. Hey, I'm God. But he says it over and over and over in so many ways. It's packed in this passage. And so Jesus, like, don't just go back to Moses providing bread in the wilderness in the Old Testament. Go back to Moses parting the Red Sea. Psalm 77 is about that in the Old Testament. It says this, you are a God who performs miracles. With your mighty arm, you redeemed your people. The waters saw you, God. The waters saw you and writhed. The very depths were convulsed. Your path led through the sea. Your way through the mighty waters, though your footprints were not seen. In the book of Job, which is in the Old Testament of the Bible, God is pictured as the one who walks on water. Job 9:8. He, God, alone, stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. Otherwise, treading on waves is something that only God can do. And so Jesus did this to boldly declare that he is divine. He walks on water, and he intends to parallel God's sovereignty over the waves, and it conveys his power to control chaos and save people. And then in verse 48 it says, he was about to pass them by, and so many people read that, scholars too, like, what does that mean? Like he's out there strolling on the waves in the storm. They're like, we're going to die. Oh, here comes Jesus. He's passing us. They're like, what is going on? So he's like, do, and he's passing them by. Like, why is this happening right now? Well, again, you might not know these stories or references, but you could jot them down. So this is part of that web of Old Testament motifs that's behind the text. Look at Exodus 33. Moses says to God, show me your glory. And what does God do? He passes by Moses. Like, you can't look at me in the face or you will die. But I want you to do this. You get ready. I'm going to pass you by. And then there's 1 Kings 19, this powerful prophet named Elijah. He's in a metaphorical storm. He is depressed. He wants to die. In this chapter, he prays for death. And so God tells Elijah, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass you by. So God passes by Moses. He passes by Elijah just for them to get a glimpse of the power of God. And I don't want to get too far into this, but it's really cool that whenever God declares his name, which I'm about to explain, whenever God declares his name, he always says, or if he's going to pass somebody by, get back. Like, stay back. This is dangerous for you. Here, he passes them by, and they're like, whoa, Jesus, we need help. And he's like, I'm coming to you. I'm entering the boat with you. That God is with us. That now God is in the flesh. God treads the waters as the man Jesus of Nazareth. And it's this, wow, the mystery of this passage and what Jesus is showing them and revealing to them. So in chapter 6, verse 50, he says, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And it's the same thing. So here, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Interpreters have such a difficult time with this, making this feel like normal English, because it's just not normal grammar, even in the original Greek. Or you go back to the Old Testament, even in Hebrew, it's not normal language, so it sounds weird, because this is not a very formal translation, but he's saying, take courage, it is I. Well, that feels strange. It is I, don't be afraid. Well, because what is being translated from the Greek is ego, eimi. And literally, some Christians will know what this means. He's saying, take courage, I am. Take courage, I am. Don't be afraid. What does that mean? Well, Moses again, Exodus chapter 3, back in the Old Testament, Moses is talking to God who appears as a burning bush that won't burn up. And Moses is like, hey, if I do what you're telling me to do, go to Israel, or to go to Egypt, to Pharaoh, and I'm going to lead the Israelites out of slavery, who am I going to tell them sent me? They're going to ask, who sent you? What is your name? And God's response is, I am. I am who I am. And again, the grammar, it doesn't even make sense in Hebrew. It's just so strange. It's just the Hebrew word for to be. But scholars have taken that. There are no vowels in Hebrew. Scholars have taken that and just said, when you put vowels in it, we think the name that he says is Jehovah, but probably more accurately, Yahweh. And so that is the name that God tells us, this is the name you can call me, I am. And so it's really strange, because it's like what he's saying is, I am existence. That you will never say of me, God will be, because God has no cause. There's no time when anyone would have ever said God will be, or God was, because God has no ending. I am existence. Being itself has sent you, Moses. Being itself. See, it doesn't make any grammatical sense, but you get the point. And Jesus saying, that's who's here. I'm passing you by to show you who I am. I'm going to pass you by, and take comfort. I am. This is who this is. I am Yahweh. And unlike the Old Testament, where God says, Yahweh says, Moses, I am. Now, take your shoes off. This is holy ground. Get back. Here, Jesus comes near. I am. And I'm going to enter the boat with you. And so the story is Jesus coming as a divine figure to rescue floundering disciples who are in a storm and who are stuck. He comes as an elusive presence that we cannot control. And then notice, together with that power and the divine presence of God, like wrapped in a human body, look how tender he is. He says, take courage, I am. Do not be afraid. And this just, if you meditate on that for a moment, just to think, it isn't terribly hard to see what Mark is trying to tell us by including this miracle. If you can read, sometimes you've probably heard about psychological studies where people see or hear about other folks who are going through, some terrible thing in life. Their life is blown up. Terrible things have happened to them. And studies show that most of us, when we hear those stories or see those stories, we tend to think, well, because that person probably wasn't wise. That person probably didn't save. That person shouldn't have done that, or that person could have avoided that. And so there's a strong psychological bent to humans to assume that they must have contributed deeply to it. And of course, sometimes people have, no doubt. But it's kind of like our knee jerk is they're going through something bad, they probably screwed up to do that. They didn't save, and I would have saved. And so why would we do that psychologically? Well, you might argue that it's self-defense. It's kind of our way that if someone's life is blown up, we desperately want to believe that it won't happen to us if we're smart enough, if we're savvy enough, if we're competent enough. And so let me just reassure you that storms are coming in life. Storms will come, and some of them will be beyond you. Some of them you will be out of your depth. Let me give 4 examples. Bereavement, that's mourning the death of a loved one. Ask my buddy Joe. It's so difficult. 2, sickness. 3, relational betrayal. And 4, financial disaster. No matter how hard you work, how smart you are, how many good connections you have, there is no way you are going to avoid all 4 of those in your lifetime. It's just the truth. It's going to happen to you. You're going to be out of your depth. You won't be able to handle these storms unless strength comes from outside of you. No, outside of this world. Strength has to come from somewhere else to get through that kind of storm. But notice Jesus is tender. There are times when he rebukes the disciples, but here in the storm, he doesn't come and say, I know this is your fault in some way, like we are bent to do. He doesn't come and say, you freaking fools, why did you not trust me? He doesn't say that. He says, hey, it's me. Don't be afraid. I'll get in the boat with you. And so the real Jesus is a combo of an uncontrollable force, and also you look at him and say, but he loves me that much. Like he'll get in the boat with me, and he's gentle. He's powerful, and he loves me like this. If that's the truth, I can handle any storm. If Jesus is that powerful, and he loves me that much. What's fun about this passage is it does seem like there's multiple miracles that happen. Warren Wiersbe, he says, a number of miracles were involved in this event. Verse 51, he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed. Does that sound like a normal thing just happened right there? Like if you're paying close attention, you're like, whoa. A guy named Walter W. Wessel writes, this was unmistakably some relationship between him getting in the boat and the calming of the wind. Only this explains the attitude of the disciples. He gets in, the storm disappears, and they're like, whoa. And so this is not the first time he has calmed a storm. It's the second time recorded. Mark, a scholar named James Brooks says, Mark unquestionably describes a miracle here. This verse suggests a third miracle took place. Well, what are they? If you're keeping track, the miracle of seeing through the storm, the miracle of walking on water, treading the waves as only God can do, and now the calming of the storm. So when Christ is there, William Barclay writes, the storm becomes calm, the tumult becomes a peace. What cannot be done is done. The unbearable becomes bearable, and people pass the breaking point and do not break. That's what happens when Jesus is in the boat with you during the storm. The focal point of the story at the end is on the disciples' response. Like it really makes it clear the disciples fail to understand the multiplying of the loaves and the fish, and they fail to understand this miracle, these miracles together. And so it says their hearts were hardened, which is crazy because that's already been said of Jesus' religious opponents earlier in Mark. Like the disciples have been with him all this time, and it's like they're becoming more like his opponents than they're becoming like him. And I love just the honesty, the raw candidness of Mark. He is always being raw and saying, here's when the disciples were thick. Here's when the disciples doubted. Here's when their hearts were hard, just to show us they are just like us. They have times when their faith swells, and other times they're like, they just don't get it. And that's kind of what he's pointing out here. But Jesus doesn't rebuke them. He gives them calm assurance. But I love that he makes it clear, these aren't some crazy guys walking around that have halos glowing above their heads. They're normal people like you and like me. Rob Colbrin, NASA, my buddy, talked about astronaut bone density issues. And he told me all about this, and he sent me an article. He's like, yeah, I'll send you this interesting article on it. And I read it back years ago. But you know what the answer is? He said what NASA's trying to do to get these trips to Mars or these long journeys in general to happen, these difficult journeys, he says is what they realize, of course, is the key is resistance. It is exercise. It is trying to figure out how do we have a regiment going on the whole time for these months that they're in a spaceship, a space shuttle, or they're on Mars where the gravity isn't as strong. The bones will lose density unless they're constantly being impacted. There's constantly some kind of exercise that's keeping those bones strong. So wise, again, of NASA to figure this out and know this. But the idea is astronauts need more resistance training on long missions to stay strong enough for the entire journey. Why would Jesus send the disciples out into the storm? Why would he allow them to experience the storm at all? Well, he knows that we need storms and we need resistance to keep us strong in the journey. For us to build strength at all so that we will not become weak without facing storms. Invite Jesus into the boat to be a part of the journey with you. Let's pray.